text this morning, the sermon text, is found in Deuteronomy. Mic'd up here. Is that on now? Okay. Text is in Deuteronomy, the 34th chapter. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. The Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you shall not cross over there. I've let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over there." Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the Lord's command. He was buried in a valley in the land of Moab opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His sight was unimpaired and his vigor had not abated. The Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the period of mourning for Moses was ended. Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him, and the Israelites obeyed him, doing as the Lord had commanded Moses. Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. He was unequaled for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt, against Pharaoh and all his servants and his entire land, and for all the mighty deeds and all the terrifying displays of power that Moses performed in the sight of Israel. This is the word of the Lord. By the lectionary, we follow the lectionary, not every Sunday, but most every Sunday. We will use a text from the lectionary. Now let me explain what the lectionary is for those who may not remember what that means. The lectionary just simply is a list of texts that is created that the church uses as a basis for worship on every particular Sunday. Most Sundays have one Old Testament reading from from something other than the Psalms. It usually has one psalm that's listed. Then there's usually one text from the letters or from Revelation out of the New Testament. And then usually one text from the Gospels. Steve read the text this morning from the Gospels, from Matthew. Now there are 4 different lectionary, or more than 4, but there are 4 predominant lectionaries. There's the Catholic lectionary. The Episcopalians have their own lectionary. The Lutherans have their own lectionary. And then there is what's called the Revised Common Lectionary, which is what we use. And it's the lectionary used by most Reformed congregations that use a lectionary. So, on any given Sunday, we will be reading the same texts, one of the same texts, that thousands of churches across the world are using for their worship service. And my thought was, as I started looking at this and began to pull it together, that it is amazing to me. It's just one of those God things that, as random as our topics were, and the order of those topics, for our series of sermons on Do One Thing. And as sort of random as the lectionary texts are, it's just amazing that the two would ever intersect in any world other than God's plan. So the text this morning actually does have something to say to us that I think is very important with respect to where we are in our church life. The text is about Moses' legacy. It's about his legacy, what he left the world. It's at the end of Deuteronomy. It is at the point where Moses is getting old. He's as we saw, he died in the text. But the text says that never before has there been, and never since has there been a prophet like Moses to rise up in the land. And it's a text that very succinctly lets us know that Moses was a great man and left a great legacy. Now let's think about that for a minute, because if you think about who Moses was, it's almost impossible that this man could have done what this man did. He was born a slave, right? His mother put him in a basket and put him on the river. Now, you know, how many mothers could do that? I mean, in one respect, it was wonderful in God's plan that she did it. But in another respect, is how awful is that? To put your own child in. But Moses caught a break. Moses was found in the river by the Pharaoh's daughter, who took him out, took him into her home, and raised Moses as if he were her own child. A very unlikely scenario. Moses was raised in the lap of luxury. He could have been anything in the world he wanted to be except Pharaoh. He couldn't be Pharaoh because he was not a biological child. Anything else Moses could have been. But then, in one respect, Moses blew it. He threw it all away in one moment of anger. He saw an Egyptian slave driver, basically, beating an Israel, a Jew. And Moses responded and killed the man. So this child, who caught a lucky break at an early age, ended up throwing it all away in one moment of anger. And he went from being a member of the Pharaoh's household to being a criminal, a murderer on the run. And he left Egypt to escape punishment, and he went into the desert. And there Moses caught another lucky break. He ran into a man named Jethro, the priest of Midian, who I would assume introduced Moses to a different God. Now Moses would have been familiar with all of the gods of Egypt, but he would not know about Yahweh God, about the God. The priest of Midian introduced Moses to this Yahweh God. And in the process, Moses ended up marrying one of Jethro's daughters. And he became then a shepherd out in the desert, tending the flocks of his father-in-law, hardly training to become a great leader of people. But there's where Moses heard God's call on his life. And you know the story about the burning bush. Moses, however historically accurate that story is, it really doesn't matter, because the important point of that story is that Moses heard God's call on Moses' life. Now, like many prophets, Moses this. I'm not a leader of men. I can barely speak. God had an answer. You've got a brother. We'll let him do the speaking for you. We can hardly keep his mouth shut. He'll be glad to talk for you. So every objection that Moses could have come up with, God had some way of overcoming that objection with Moses. So Moses followed God, and Moses became one of God's most obedient servants, even unto death. He was able to lead the people from under the oppression. He performed several miracles as he was negotiating the departure of the people with the Pharaoh. So he did what God called him to do. But the problem that Moses had was he didn't have any place to take them. He got them out of Egypt, but he didn't have any place to go. He wandered around in the desert for 40 years. Now, 40 years is not an exact number. 40 years means a long time. The number 40 means a long time. So Moses and the people wandered around out in the desert for a long time. And during this time, if we read the record of what happened, Moses would go up on the mountain to talk to God, to try to find out what God's plans for, and almost every time, down below, the people were up to some sort of mischief. They were up to some sort of rebellious activity, like a bunch of teenagers or something. They just could not seem to grasp the vision that Moses had, that God had for them. Now, as it ended up, that 40-year period, that long period of time, was the birthplace of the nation. That's where the people actually came together because of the adversity that they faced. They became consolidated and molded into a people. But Moses didn't see that. Moses was not allowed to enjoy the fruits of his labor, the hard work that he did to get the people from out of Egypt right up to the point of going into the Holy Land, or to the Promised Land. Now, in my mind, that's a terrible tragedy. Here this man worked all of his life. You'd think, if I were him, I'd want to go over there and build my little mansion and have a BMW. I mean, I've earned that. I've led these people out, done exactly what you said, God. Now, I want to live the life. I want to live the dream. Moses didn't get to live the dream. God said, Moses, I want you to die. And Moses was so faithful. He lay down and he died. That's what the text says. And was unable to cross over and enjoy the fruits of his labor. Now the people did. The people were able to cross over. And they became a people that ended up being the caretakers of God's law. What a great gift these people have been to the world. Out of these people, out of their faithfulness, and sometimes their rebellion, they have maintained until this day the Torah, the law of God. Probably one of the most ethical writings that man has ever created. And they have maintained it for the world. Out of their heritage has come three great religions. Jewish religion, the Islamic religion, and of course, Christianity. What a great legacy that Moses has left the world. And my guess is that if you were to ask Moses the moment before he died, if he were a successful person or not, he would have probably said no. He would have said, I fought with this bunch for the 40 years that we've been traveling around, and now I'm not going to get to go into the promised land? Well, of course not. I was almost successful. But the fact is, we're still talking about Moses today. Isn't that something? What a legacy this man has left.
I want to tell you a little story about legacy. Another man that lived a somewhat controversial life up in the 16th century was a man named John Calvin. Calvin, of course, you know John Calvin as the father of the Reformed tradition, that part of the Reformation that of which we are a part of. Well, there's another part of that of the Reformation that is a legacy of Calvin's, and that's the Huguenots. They were the folks who left the French folks, French-speaking people, who left the Catholic Church and ended up being persecuted because of their heresy against the church. There's a little village up in the French Alps called Le Chambon. And it's a small, little dirt poor village. There was a man named Pierre Sauvage who was born in that village in 1944. He decided to go back to the village and make a film about this village. And the film is called The Weapons of the Spirit. And the reason that this village's experience is film-worthy is because during World War II, this little village saved over 5,000 Jews. At first, one or two families came into the little village up in the Alps, which was tucked away and out of the way. They came there because the Nazis had rolled into France and they were seeking refuge. Just one or two families. And they were sheltered there. They were given safety until then they could get somewhere else across the borders. And after one or two, 3 or 4 more came. And then 4 or 5 more families came. And then literally they began coming by the trainloads to seek shelter in this very tiny village of Le Chambon. The village didn't even have 5,000 inhabitants. They saved 5,000 Jews during World War II. And Pierre Sauvage was one of those. His parents came to Le Chambon on the train during 1944. His mother was several months pregnant, and he was born in the village and protected by this bunch of Huguenots. Now, he went back to ask the question, why? Why would a whole village risk their lives to save even one Jew? I mean, think about the conspiracy that had to be underfoot here in order for them to not be discovered. They had to have 100% agreement in the village that this is what they were going to do. Now, the Huguenots are our first cousins in the church, as Reformed believers. And can you imagine us having 100% agreement on anything in the church? Nevertheless, something that's as dangerous as hiding a Jew was during the Nazi invasion. Their answer was, it needed to be done. Or, Christ told us to love one another. That was their answer. They are the legacy of the Reformed tradition of John Calvin. And even further back, they are part of the legacy of Moses. They would not be there had someone not done something that was selfless and with nothing but the future in mind. Here's something to take note of. When Moses and God were on that mountain right before Moses died, the text says that God showed him the entire land and named all these places that were out there, Judah being one of them. Here's something to think about. When God was telling Moses about all these places, they didn't exist at the time. They weren't there. Historically, they were not in existence. Maybe Jericho, but it wasn't much more than a little oasis in the desert. But certainly the land of Judah wasn't there. It wasn't there. God was showing Moses something that was yet to come. Here's the point for this morning. As we look at our church, when we look out over the landscape, what do we see? Do we see something that's there, that's maybe not doing so well, or something that is as it is right now? Or do we see something that is yet to be? Do we see a church that is in existence today? Or can we see, when we look out over the landscape, can we see that church that is in the future? And the question for us, the immediate question for our congregation, and this is about as blunt as I can be, the immediate question for us is, are we going to be the ones who close the doors? Or are we going to be looked back on in the future as the ones who had the vision to see a church that was not yet there? What can you do for your church? You can have the vision of a legacy that is not yet there. Let's pray. Dear God, you have placed us in this place. You have put us here, each one of us, as individuals and as a congregation. This congregation has had a good history. It has started from a church plant by the United Presbyterian Church, the Northern Church, and it has grown and flourished. And we pray that in this moment, that you will give us a vision of the church that is not yet here. We lift our prayer in